Good evening. Thank you for all for being here. My name is Glenn Brand, and I'm the Superintendent of the Wilmington Public Schools. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to say a few words about this evening's meeting. As I think most know, I called this meeting for two reasons tonight. First, to hear from the outside investigator, Mr. Patrick Hanley, who I'll introduce in a few minutes, as the outside investigator who conducted an investigation into the allegations of abuse that were brought forth against Wildwood staff during the 2020-2021 school year. And second, to provide updates on the important steps that the district continues to take and will continue to take to strengthen our internal policies, training, and reporting procedures going forward. After Mr. Hanley has a chance to present his findings and answer any questions that you might have about his investigation, I'll be providing a brief update on the work that we are planning to do following this report as we strive to review and strengthen our internal policies and procedures. These are our only agenda items this evening. What's not on the agenda, but what is impossible to ignore, is the emotions surrounding what we are here this evening to discuss. As your superintendent and also as a parent, I realize how upsetting that this is. I hear your concerns, I feel your anger, and I understand your questions. Believe me, I share these same feelings, and quite frankly, I have many of the same questions about how someone could ever act in a way that would harm a child in their care or in that of ours. In an effort to be as open and as transparent as possible as it relates to this investigation, we have taken the following steps. On Wednesday of last week, as you know, we alerted current and past Wildwood families that this meeting tonight would be taking place. We chose to send this email to this group since the situation impacts them most directly. We also wanted them to have the first look at the findings. This meeting has been posted at Town Hall as a public meeting, and as you're aware, we've asked WCTV to record this meeting, which will be available for a replay for those that are not able to be here tonight. And this information certainly will be made available to the wider community at a following point in time. In addition, I think it's important to point out that a copy of the document that we've provided here tonight will be available. We're terming this as an executive summary, and it will be made available to those who request it from my office. In other words, tonight's meeting and the information that will be shared is available and accessible to anyone and everyone who is interested. We want to provide you with as much information as we can, but we are also limited in what we can say about this matter due to student privacy as well as personnel records law. Names of those involved won't be used, and Mr. Hanley won't be able to speak to specifics about any of the students or staff who have directly been involved in this situation. I also want to be upfront with you at this point in sharing that at the direction of the district's legal counsel, I will not, due to impending litigation, be taking questions at this time tonight. I will, however, be releasing additional information as we move forward with the additional trainings and some of the other things that I'll mention a little bit later this evening. With that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Mr. Hanley, who's here to my left, your right. Mr. Hanley is a partner of the law firm of Butters Brazilian LLP in Boston. He has represented business and individuals in connection with government investigations, professional discipline, business disputes, and regulatory matters. He continues to be involved in both criminal and civil issues in both state and federal courts. Mr. Hanley has worked in the Office of the Attorney General and has led numerous grand jury investigations, while also serving as general counsel to the State Police Association of Massachusetts, and served as the Major Crimes Division, as well as in the gaming industry here in Mass. The district sought the services of Mr. Hanley a number of months back to complete an investigation regarding the allegations of abuse of children at the Wildwood School. To be clear, Mr. Hanley does not represent the Wilmington Public Schools or the town of Wilmington in any way. And with that, at this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Hanley.
Thank you. So as Dr. Brand indicated, I'm not going to use any names to describe the people that we're talking about and that you're interested in. And but it's not designed to just be cryptic for the sake of being cryptic. I do this for two reasons. I want to avoid any new legal problems by revealing any medical, educational information about students, any personnel records. But I think more importantly, I want to be respectful to the students. And in order to do an investigation like I did, it required me to go out and talk to people that I've never met. I've only driven through Wilmington. I've never worked for the Wilmington schools, and I don't really know anybody here. So I needed to go out either virtually or in person and make connections, earn trust of everybody involved. And I think I did that, but I don't want to blow it now by being too free with my words at this important meeting. And so I don't want to jeopardize anything I've done so far. So I am going to take questions in a little bit. And so I'd ask that when you ask me questions, use words like educator, principal, student, things like that, rather than any names. You might know who I'm talking about, or you might think that it's okay to say it, but please don't do that. I think it'd be ultimately counterproductive. The only person in the school district I'm going to identify is Dr. Brandt, and that's it. You've received my executive summary, and I don't know how much time you've had to review it. So I'm going to start with some of the things that were important to me that are in there, but were important when the district hired me. So I was hired at the beginning of May to investigate allegations of abuse of kids in classroom 7 at the Wildwood school. And I was hired by the district. And at that time, I was given no marching orders as to find or not find any particular thing, as to believe or disbelieve any particular person, or arrive at any particular outcome. If they had said that to me, I wouldn't have taken the job. My job was to figure out, had there been any abuse of any kids, gather evidence in any way that I was available, and report back my conclusions in an expeditious manner. So to do that, I conducted dozens of interviews of people. I accessed records of the school district. I received records from parents, for example, from others that interface with the school district. I received, for example, information from the Wilmington Police Department, from the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office, from the Department of Children and Family. And I also, as I indicated, I conducted interviews. Sometimes people had lawyers, sometimes people had union representatives, and I can report to you that none of those people interfered with any of my investigations. Only one person that I asked to be interviewed said no. That person later said, changed their mind and said yes, but it was sort of too far gone. I was almost done. But in any event, the point I'm making is that I received really as much cooperation as I could have hoped for in order to try to do the work that I was doing. What I did was try to answer those questions, and I did arrive at answers based on the evidence I gathered of whether or not there was abuse, and if so, by whom, right? Those are my two questions that I had to ask, had to answer if I could. So my conclusion is yes, there was abuse of 3 kids this school year and 1 kid last school year. And when I say this school year, I mean 2020 to 2021, and last school year, 19 to 20, okay? And I identified that it was an educator that had engaged in that abuse, and I described in a little more detail in the executive summary the form of the abuse that I found. I reported that back to the district. The district took no issue with my conclusions, but they wanted to make sure that they were clear, and they had an additional question. And the question was, let me go back. that there was one educator I found had engaged in abuse. The other finding I made was that the second educator assigned to the same classroom could not plausibly have not known of it, but there was no evidence that that person had engaged in it, okay? Anyway, so I reported that back to the district, and there was an additional question. What, if anything, did the principal know? And so I had gathered a lot of information about the school. I had interviewed a lot of people there, and I had gathered that information, but it wasn't what I was originally asked. So, but it made sense to provide that information. And so I went back and I did a little bit more, evidence gathering, and then just took a look from this additional perspective of the evidence I had gathered to date. And what I concluded that was that the principal didn't have any information or know prior to the allegations being made of abuse of the children in the school. The principal had investigated prior allegations and had, in one instance, brought the allegation forward about the particular educator, had brought that forward to the superintendent, and the superintendent had suspended the teacher as a result of the investigation that was conducted. So the conclusion I drew was that the principal did not know. The principal had conducted investigations in the past, one of which had resulted in discipline of the particular educator in question. I think that it's a fair question to wonder, you know, why do they need me, right? Well, I think that when there are allegations of abuse like this, and when they are serious and they are repeated, it makes sense for a school district or any particular entity, whether it's any type of organization, to look outside, find someone that is independent, that is not going to be, nobody's going to wonder whether or not they have a particular side or they want a particular outcome, and it's just someone who, but also has a certain amount of expertise. I've interviewed, more than 1,000 people. I've conducted hundreds of investigations. And so I had also the leeway and ability to look backwards. And so I looked backwards and I interviewed people going back in time, and I learned a lot of useful information by doing that. But having the capacity to do that, I think, makes sense and accounts for why, in part, I come to the conclusion that I have. Those were, I think, my prepared remarks, but I welcome any questions that you might have before I turn it over to Dr. Brand. She'll tell you sort of what things will look like going forward. But if you have any questions for me, I'm welcome to take them. I don't know how to organize picking people, but I saw a hand. Go ahead.
How far back did you go in your research? How far back, as far as, a case that may have filed?
So,
What year?
Sure. So the question that I had before me was whether or not there had been any abuse of children assigned to Classroom 7 during the 2020-2021 school year. But in order to, so that's where I was focused, and that was the question that I was, or the dual questions I was tasked with answering if I could. In order to do that, though, I looked backwards. I received incoming phone calls from people, and so I looked back. I received information as far back as the mid-2000s, but I didn't draw conclusions about that evidence. I used that information to come to the conclusions I did as to this last school year, and then it also provided me with information to draw a conclusion as to the school year right before it. But I didn't I certainly listened to the evidence, but I didn't draw formal conclusions. Did you get what I mean?
I'm just curious how far back you went in your research because of cases that were, earlier.
I can think of, I know 2005 is an early year. I think it was the earliest, but I could have my dates wrong in my head, but,
Right.
okay.
Patrick, hi, and thank you. We've
Good to
met.
see you.
I'm Stephen Burgle, and as you know, I represent
know.
a number of the families whose children were victims, unfortunately.
Sure.
The question I have, sitting here, the first question I have is, the concern that my clients have, the parents have, at least the ones that I represent, is that something like this never happens again. And that seems to be a broader question than what you were tasked with. It seems as though the question and the issue that you were asked to research was just a limited issue, meaning or being, was there abuse by this individual or others, certainly by this individual, during the 2019 to 20 and 2020 to 21 school years? That's a very narrow issue. The concern that my clients have is not just the harm that they and their families and their children had, but to ensure that this never happens again. And that is a systemic issue, a culture where something like this was allowed to go on for many, many years. I have, families here who alleged abuse with this particular individual going back over a decade. And it seems pretty clear that this was allowed to exist and there were no repercussions, complaints had been made, nothing had been done. So I appreciate, I know the parents appreciate the work that you've done independently. But the question is, were you ever asked your opinion as to whether or not your inquiry, your investigation should have been broader so that a systemic change could have been made to set up a system of checks and balances to explain how this could have happened for so many years, how this couldn't have been exposed before, how all these children should have been victimized when if it was dealt with many years ago, they would have not been victimized, and how can we ensure going forward that the same kind of thing doesn't exist? Not just that this person is no longer in the school system, but that another person can't come forward and be protected for some reason or insulated from accountability.
So I anticipate that Superintendent Brand will address some of the what's going to happen going forward. I also think that it sends us an important message that the school district would bother to hire someone like me to do an investigation, not know how it's going to come out, and ultimately it came out and I drew the conclusions that I have. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but I think that some of what he will say, or maybe all of what he will say, will address that. And so, other questions? Go ahead, sir.
Richard Walsh, co-counsel with Attorney Burgle. My concern, I think you did a fantastic job on the prime part of the report. I have a bigger issue with the supplement having to do with the principal, because the principal knew several of these incidents, granted after they occurred. And part of the problem that has occurred in this school is that they were never brought to the right authorities, meaning DCF. They were never publicized so that people would know. They were all secretly handled, and you seem to let the principal off on that. DCF has supported an allegation of neglect against the school system itself for not notifying DCF, for not taking the appropriate action, and for trying to handle everything in-house instead of filing the formal 51A. Were you asked to, and did you address any of those issues in your report?
The question that before me was not whether or not there had been neglect. I was at whether or not there had been abuse. So that's one point that I think is important. I think the second thing, as to the principal, there is The principal conducted multiple investigations. Sometimes, as you know, you're a lawyer, that you may suspect that something's happened, but if you don't develop the evidence, it can't go any further. So it may be that, I wasn't there for those investigations, but that's my assessment of what seemed to happen. It wasn't that nothing happened, it's that there was insufficient evidence to corroborate that something had. The principal did find wrongdoing in the prior school year. That was elevated to the superintendent, and the superintendent suspended the educator. So I guess those are the conclusions I make. I think that as to, you mentioned DCF. I think what you'll hear from Dr. Brandis, there'll be additional training on DCF notifications.
I think the bigger concern is that this is consistent with Wildwood's non-disclosure of what was going on all of these years and what allowed it to continue to fester. And I think there were prior head teachers that were notified. This particular principal was notified by at least 2 different paras, and action was not taken then to bring the light to the public, to let these parents know.
I understand your point. I think that the fact that we're here now presenting the findings that we have, and it, I think, says something about what the district, at least what they've conveyed to me, plans to do going forward. But I can't rectify what's in this report.
I'm sorry, what is the plan going forward?
I think you'll hear that from the superintendent sort of after my question. So I'm just not in a position to answer the question because I don't work for the district. But I think you'll hear that. Are there other questions about? Yes.
So my daughter was a student at room 7 from 19 to 20, and then 20 to February of 21. So when all this started, my daughter had already been pulled out of the class. We didn't get any of this notification. Me even being here is secondhand from somebody sending me a link. So we got no information. But yet my daughter was in that class
Yeah.
for a year and a half.
I can't speak to the notifications, but
So were you just given a list of children that were in the class at that time when the complaint was initially made?
I have no problem telling everybody that I was the one who made the post.
Yes, and thank you. That's the only reason I knew anything was happening.
I found it completely ridiculous that that didn't get sent out to everybody in that school and the district. As a parent, as a father, as someone who, even if you're not a parent or father or mother, living in the school district, you should know that. You should know that something has been alleged. You know, it's unbelievable. And then after I made that post, it was unbelievable how many people came forward. And I understand where you're at with your investigation, but to say that the principal didn't know and she's not.
She should be held accountable as well.
She should. She's known for, like Steve said, a decade, at least. She's known and she's let it go.
One question, can we just confirm that the principal that suspended this teacher in the past is the same one that we're talking about tonight?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know the answer to the question. I don't know if I can legally answer the question.
Oh, okay.
I,
I just wanted to confirm that.
I was just interested to know if the list of children was narrowed down to that.
I'm trying to answer this in a way that doesn't, I talked to the parents of many children. I think that they were prompted I think to some extent, the post, sir, that you referenced led people to contact me. And so I talked to parents, not just parents of kids from this school year, but from the past.
I wasn't told that I could reach out to you. Because I sent an email saying that I didn't think my daughter had been abused, and I didn't think that she had seen anything, but I didn't want to question her because I didn't want to give her leading questions. I don't have a question there,
Sure.
so, but I never got a response back.
I think a lot of us would have liked to have spoken up if we had the opportunity to speak with you
Yeah.
and knew about it.
Okay.
If
I
knew
as
could
well
have,
didn't
I
know.
would have.
Yes?
You've given us, or the school has given us just what's referenced as a summary of a final report of 27 pages in length, and then a supplementary report, which is 6 pages in length. And I certainly appreciate the summary, but I understand that there are confidentiality laws. But aren't the parents entitled to a copy of the report, and can't it be redacted in a way that the people are not identified, that the names are removed, and there aren't any violations of privacy law, so that they can read the report in the interest of transparency, because that's been lacking for so long, just to have that final report to be able to look at it. I'm sure there are ways, and I'm not a privacy lawyer, but I can't imagine that it can't be redacted so that names are removed, so that we could see the report and not have to rely on a 3 or 4 page summary of a 33-page document or 2 documents.
I understand your point. I know that you called me about this particular question, and because, like I said, I don't work for the district, I referred you to district council. That might be true, but I think it's got to be worked out, and I think that, I know what's in my report. I think it would be a lot of redactions in order to do that, but in any event,
Who would be the person at the school that the parents could ask to release that report? Who has the power at the school to release the report?
I don't think it's just a matter of the power of the school. I think that there are students the students have rights. There are personnel record laws that have to be abided by. I just think that it's not as simple as power. I think it's more than that. Other questions?
So what exactly is a mandated reporter? Let's just start with that. Who is a mandated reporter? What is that about?
Who is a mandator? That is a quiz that I don't know that I'm ready to take right now. But I think what you're getting at is, are educators mandated reporters? Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the answer is yes. Answer is yes.
So, my child was interviewed twice by 3 mandated reporters. My child told that he was being hurt by a teacher. They never once called. I told my pediatrician what Nathan said, and she immediately called DCF without any questions. It is not the school's job to decide what gets mandated and what doesn't. That is DCF's job. Why did this happen?
So I can't give you the why this happened, but I can tell you that I anticipate Dr. Brandt's going to talk a bit about training about filing of 51As, which is like the colloquial name for what mandated reporters have to file. I know that's not necessarily a satisfactory answer in all ways, but it's the best answer I have at the moment. I thought I saw, yes?
How many school districts have you and/or your firm represented?
I don't know that we represent any school districts.
So are you saying this is the first time you've been hired by a school district to perform an investigation in an educational manner, in an educational platform? To my knowledge, I don't know that the firm has before. I can tell you that I haven't been hired before. This is your first time dealing with this type of situation in
No.
a school setting?
Just not at the law firm.
No, so you personally, you have investigated incidents at a school setting?
I've investigated, yes. I've investigated all different kinds of incidents that in a school setting. I've investigated allegations of abuse of children, and I've conducted hundreds of investigations of all different kinds. So
Does that include investigations of special needs students, though?
I have conducted investigations where the victims had special needs, sure.
You also indicated in your report that at no time did the Teachers Association or representative attorneys interfere in the interview. Are we to believe that at no time did they caucus or anything of that nature? Did they leave the room together if a difficult question was asked?
I
Or
didn't
am
see,
going too far with that?
I mean, I'm trying to think of the interviews themselves. There was, nobody jumped ahead of my question. Nobody said, please leave the room. I need to, and cause some ruckus. I provided opportunities for people to take breaks, to talk, but I didn't take it that any of what was happening interfered with what I was doing, that people's answers changed, for example. And so, I mean, I'm drawing on my own impressions to some extent, but those were the impressions that I had, and I was alert to I want to make sure that people are giving me straight answers, and I ask questions different ways, and my observation was that nobody interfered.
So did anybody caucus after, at any time, request to leave the room together? during the
I did,
investigation?
like witnesses caucusing, is that what you mean? I only interview one witness at a time.
What I'm saying is, you're interviewing the teacher has his or her representative there. You ask a question, and it's like, we need to caucus, where they leave the room, or you leave the room.
I did leave the room a couple of times, and I'm trying to think about what the reason was. I don't think it was due to a particular question. Yeah, I don't remember. And then the people that had lawyers, I don't think any of the lawyers stopped the interviews, as far as I can recall.
Okay, and then one last question. Did your investigation permit you to utilize, like IT professionals or anything, to review emails sent or received on Wilmington Public School servers? And what I'm referring to is this: historically or traditionally, with government computers, be it city, state, local, the employees have no expectation of privacy when you use a computer that's owned by the government.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, trust me, everything's on a server. So, were there any computer-related investigations or research going back in this time frame regarding any of these allegations?
I obtained records from the district, some of which were on computers, some of which were on paper, that provided information about prior allegations. I also obtained emails from parents, for example, to the district. So those are also records of whether or not any restraints had been used, or excuse me, whether or not any reports had been made of use of restraints. Restraints is a defined term under Massachusetts law. It was something I looked into. It ultimately didn't. There was no report of use of restraints. There was no lawful use of restraints, but I looked into it because I didn't know that at the beginning. So I didn't do forensic exams of computers, if that's what you're getting at, but I did obtain records of the types I just described.
Records that were provided to you by the Wilmington Public School System?
Not all provided by the district, no.
Were you allowed to search for yourself?
If I had asked, I suspect that they would have given them to me. I did ask them to conduct certain targeted searches of records, and they produced
They were the
records.
ones retrieving the information, not you.
Yes, but the
That answers my question, thank you.
well, I also received records from parents, email records from parents. I think that's important.
I have a question.
Yes?
You said that 3 students were abused in the last year and 1 before that. Does that mean 4 incidents total, or are you talking about these students multiple times were abused?
I don't know that I can tell you how many times. I can tell you I'm talking about 4 students, but I don't know the total number of times.
And these things that you talk about in the summary, grabbed, held, and shoved with a foot, were these disciplinary actions?
I don't have.
Kids acted up and this is how they were treated, or was this just, hey, today's Monday, so I'm gonna kick you?
I don't think that they can be characterized as legitimate discipline because they weren't reported as discipline, and they would need to be reported if they were if these actions were done as discipline. So I don't characterize them as discipline. I don't know that, what you said, you know, it's Monday and I'm gonna do this. I don't know that it's that either, but I don't think it qualifies. Let me be a little more precise. The information I gathered did not support that this was discipline, particularly lawful discipline. Go ahead.
I have a question.
Sure.
On what she had said too. How many complaints did you find? How many families complained? How many? In total, not just the
Oh.
findings in total. Over the years.
I think more than 6.
More than 6, less than 10?
I think that's about right, yeah. I'm trying to, you know, call it up in my mind, but I think that's right. Other questions? Yes, hi.
Hi, can you talk about the restraints? Because there's something on page 3 about restraints going unreported, and how many that was.
Sure. Sure, so let me explain that a little bit. So, as I understand it, throughout the Wilmington Public Schools, but including at the Wildwood School, there's training on restraints. You know, if somebody's having some kind of emotional outburst or is getting physical, there are techniques that folks are trained on in order to de-escalate the situation. So restraint, I think that there's a continuum, but restraints that have to be reported are those where there is some, as I understand it, some physical force used to stop a student from doing something. Those have to, under state law, they have to be reported. So there were no reports of restraint at the Wildwood School during the last couple of years, which is when I looked into. Why does that matter? So I looked into it because, as I indicated, I didn't start from a point of this abuse happened, let's gather evidence. It's find out what happened. And so I'm asking questions to see, well, was there any abuse done that was somehow following the law? And so I looked into whether or not anybody had used lawful restraints and reported it, which is, they go hand in hand. And so I guess the point I was making is that the educator at issue didn't make any report of restraints. The educator also told me that the educator hadn't used restraints and understood what it was and received this training that I'm talking about. So that's why I mention it in the report, as to just explain that almost to address a possible explanation, but that ultimately there was no evidence to conclude that lawful restraints have been used. I hope that was clear.
Was this educator restraint certified?
The educator had received the training. I get your question.
Can I say? Okay, that's enough.
Okay.
We get it.
Any other questions? Yes?
In your investigation, was there any past allegations of restraints? Past 2018, say
Back as far as 2005.
2005, 2006, was there anything on record that you saw?
That a lawful restraint had been used?
Yes.
So like the term of art restraint, I don't have any information about that. I think the online records that I accessed only went back, you know, like I said, a few years, and I didn't search for records back to 2005 that would have said that some action in 2005 would have been done as an official restraint as defined by law. So. Go ahead.
In 2005, the same principal, was it the same principal as the school year that we're talking about now?
No.
No? Okay.
Other questions? Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Brand, who has a presentation to give you. Thank you.
twice, or is that considered one and the same?
I think they're along a continuum, but I think that's maybe deeper than I'm able to answer with, precision. I know what you're asking, but,
Click slideshow and then use concurrent slides.
Yeah. Here we go. Thank you.
we can all learn.
Got it. Thank you. All right, thank you, Mr. Hanley. I want to take just a few moments, this is the second part of this evening's presentation, and share with you, again, as mentioned, I think at the outset, where it is that as a school district, as an educational community, where it is that we need to prioritize in terms of moving forward. The slides and the content herein that we'll just touch upon briefly may appear to some to be brief. However, I think it's important to underscore that the reality of this work that is highlighted in the next few slides really encompasses a number of areas that's very broad and deep, and in an organization spanning almost 500 plus staff members. There certainly will be time and effort that will be significant as we seek to prioritize certain areas of focus, which we believe can strengthen our policies, our training, and reporting procedures. My intention here is to provide our community, you in attendance and as well those that are not, with specific areas that we plan to target, mostly centering around training and professional development, given the reality that our system is one built on and centering around people. I will begin by providing a few highlights of the regular and ongoing areas of related district activity that are routinely assessed, and then it'll be followed by an overview of the various topical areas of training and professional development we believe at this point would be important to either expand upon and or focus on to strengthen our work. I think that first off, it is important to note for everyone that there is constantly monitoring and assessment and review of a wide variety of areas of practice and policies within a public educational system, including that of ours. This is not unique for Wilmington, but is rather the same for all public districts in the state. While the programs of review constituted through DESE, or the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, have taken on different names or areas of focus over time, two current pathways that have recently reviewed the WPS, or Wilmington Public Schools, as a whole include what's referred to as a coordinated program review in 2018 and tiered focus monitoring completed in the summer of 2021. These reviews and the accompanying reports are public, and they're available to anyone who examine a number of areas of our operations and policies. As you can see on the slide here, as mentioned, the activity and the number of different areas that are regularly reviewed, and gathering evidence and information from artifacts by Department of Education employees, looking at such things as special education, civil rights, and English language learners, just to name some. In addition, they do review compliance on physical restraints, bullying interventions, harassment policies, as well as equity from that through that lens throughout the district. And as mentioned, as recent as this past summer, the district is found to be in compliance with all restraint regulations, bullying and harassment intervention plans and policies, as well as special education indicators. But going beyond that reality, it is the case that I'll take a few moments here to highlight areas where we, as mentioned at the outset, intend to try and prioritize to strengthen the work that we do with educators and in turn, obviously, in support of our students that we serve. With this as a backdrop, let me shift to some of those areas in the next few slides. There are really, largely speaking, four areas in which we have identified that we think will be important for us moving forward. The first off, reporting of suspected abuse and or neglect of children, which I'll expand upon in a moment. Expanded safety care training, which I'll further explain. Investigative procedures for training in school leaders, and employee policies and handbooks. First off, the mandated reported training. This, I think, responds to the question earlier around mandated reporting. Massachusetts law requires professionals whose work bring them in contact with children to notify the Department of Children and Family Services, or DCF, as is the acronym is often used, if they suspect that a child is either abused, neglected, or both. In terms of going forward, underscoring that this is a fundamental requirement under the law for professionals who work obviously in our school system and that of all others to notify DCF. We have followed an approach similar to other districts in the past that has really centered around district-led training. However, we are shifting, and we actually have begun that shift back in the spring, to online training that's being put together and offered by the Middlesex Children Advocacy Center. It is extremely comprehensive training, and it is, we believe, helpful in clarifying in a coherent and consistent manner these expectations of our professionals. All of our staff who were employed in the Wilmington Public Schools last school year in the spring completed that training, and all new staff onboarding are coming into the Wilmington Public Schools, as well as all other staff on an annual basis will complete this training. In addition to that program that I just mentioned, the Middlesex Children's Advocacy Center program, we will also be expanding the in-person training of district policies and documentations with sessions at the beginning of the year. That's part of our mandated training annually. That takes place with staff. Shifting focus slightly to safety care training, it is an important element, we also believe, of our district moving forward to expand, and again, to, through that expansion, strengthen our supports around safety care training. If you're not familiar with the term, it's a certified training program that helps provide for staff a clear understanding for those that are in their situations in which they are dealing with challenging student situations or behaviors, and to do so in a safe and appropriate manner, especially when students may present certain behavioral challenges. It's a program that is not specific or homegrown, if you will, here in Wilmington. It's one that other school districts do, in fact, certainly use. Currently, we have, my understanding, over 200 staff members that are safety care trained, and that is an annual safety training requirement. All staff in our specialized programs are safety care trained, and we will continue as a district to, as mentioned, try and expand that training to as many as possible going forward. I mentioned at the outset around additional training for administrators. As administrators in the district currently, we receive annual training from our district council that we partner with to help support the work that we do. And that will most certainly continue, and additional training also will expand around employee and labor manners. And I think it's also just worthy to point out that we've also sought ways to expand the services and service provisions through personnel in our district. I'm pleased to be able to say that we've expanded in a number of different areas, including a counselor position at the Early Childhood Center level, to make that the equivalent of a full-time or FTE equivalent going forward in the coming school year. We have also added 2 social emotional learning and family engagement specialists, which we believe will be helpful in partnering with our families and helping our staff as well partner with families and the students that they serve. We have added additional educational assistant positions within certain programs at the elementary level, and we will continue to utilize board-certified analysts to consult with programs and the staff that work therein. So at this point, that concludes both my presentation this evening as well as tonight's agenda. In closing, while I recognize very clearly that there are certain things that can't be answered this evening, that most certainly doesn't take away from the fact that I know that a situation like this that brought us here this evening impacts each person in this room and in our community in different and deeply personal ways. With that said, I want to reiterate what I said in my June letter to the WPS community. Abuse and mistreatment of students is wholly unacceptable, counter to our values, and will not be tolerated. We will continue to do all that we can to ensure a healthy and supportive and learning environment in the Wilmington Public Schools, one that is safe, nurturing, and promotes respect for one another at all times. Thank you for being here tonight and for your patience, your understanding, and your support as we move forward. Good evening.
WCTV, connecting our community. WCTV, connecting our community. Wilmington, Massachusetts.